Should podcasters hire out a social media manager to promote their podcast? Let's answer that coming up here shortly. Hey there, podcaster. My name is the Shannon, radio broadcaster, podcaster, and podcast producer. And today we're talking about whether or not you should hire out a social media manager for your podcast. This is something that got asked on my YouTube channel just a few weeks ago, and I'm finally getting around to answering it today. But before we get to that, I want to remind beginning podcasters, if you are just starting a podcast and you are stumbling upon this video for the first time and you want to start your own podcast but don't know where to start in terms of equipment is concerned, or maybe even where to get your audio editing programs, I got an essential equipment guide that you can go ahead and download right now. It is in the description of this particular YouTube video, and that will get you started on all the equipment that you can use for your podcast. It's the same equipment that I'm using at home. It's the equipment that I've used here at the radio station, and I'll tell you which ones are the best pieces of equipment that you can use for your podcast. And of course, for the beginners and just about everyone else, if you have not noticed, my YouTube channel on the front page has a makeover right now that you can go ahead and check out. In fact, I've made playlists for everyone to go ahead and check out. It's all based on the part of the journey you are on as far as your podcast is concerned, and I've tried to organize videos that will help you when it comes down to the journey of your podcast. So go over to my YouTube channel, the front page, and you can see those playlists for yourself. So today we're going to answer that question, like I mentioned in the intro. Should you be hiring out a social media manager to promote your podcast? And this is a question that gets asked quite a bit on this channel, and I see it in Facebook groups all over the place, and people wanting to use a social media freelancer to market their podcast. And I'm going to tell you that hiring a social media manager is actually not a bad idea when it comes down to your podcast, but you have to understand when you should be hiring your, social media freelance marketing manager or whoever it may be, just because there's going to be a point in time in your podcasting journey that you will need to hire someone out, and it will take more off of your plate so that you're not struggling with trying to pump out the content. So in the beginning of your journey, it's typically going to look like you doing all of the work, and that is common for most podcasters that are out there who are just starting out in the very beginning, and podcasters trying to promote their podcasts a lot more. But then there comes that time where you want to hire someone out to help you. Yeah, you can do that. Now, if you're doing it for yourself, then you certainly understand that the amount of work that it takes to go ahead and get all that content up there. But if you streamline a lot of that work, then we can go ahead and say that your promotional efforts are worthy and they are getting traction. In fact, I've hired freelancers out every now and again to help me with my website, with my blog, sometimes promoting this particular YouTube channel, or even helping my clients with the promotion of their own podcast. So let's go over a couple of scenarios, and then I want to break it down even further so you get a better grasp and understanding of where I'm coming from and where you might be headed if you're thinking about hiring a social media freelancer, okay? So scenario number one is going to be that you produce the podcast, but you really don't have time to create the materials to promote your podcast. This means the audiograms. You don't have the blog posts that you want to create. You don't have the social media posts that you want to put out there onto Instagram. This might be you. You may just want to be focused on creating the podcast itself, the content itself. And that's very common for a lot of content creators. Now, there is an actual system that you can utilize where it talks about creating one big piece of content and then breaking it down to other pieces of content. Now, I'm going to get into that here very shortly, but let's just go ahead and let's start talking about the things that you have to consider if you're the person that is creating the podcast but don't want to do all that additional promotional work. So first, let's take these things into consideration. So number one, do you have the ability to actually hire someone? In other words, do you have the money? Do you have the capital to pay this person in order to help you promote your podcast via social media? Now, will you have some form of recurring income that will help pay for that person? Because what you're going to realize is that freelancers, they can do the work for you, but if you want to continue to see your content being pumped out there into the internet, then you're going to continue to need to pay them. And you just can't throw money at them and then expect to get these wildly great results. It's important to understand that you should know whether or not you have the money to be paying some of these freelancers. Some freelancers may be affordable, other freelancers may not be that affordable, depending on where you're getting your freelancer from, whether it's from Fiverr, whether it's from Upwork. It could be one of those platforms, and there's a million other platforms out there where you can hire out someone from the Philippines or wherever. But it's going to be completely up to you. Do you have that money to spend for that freelancer. A second thing that you should be considering is, do you have the time to vet your freelancer? Do you have time to basically, put them on a trial run in order to have them continue to do the work for you? What you're going to find with freelancers is that not all freelancers are hard workers, and not all freelancers will do the work the way that you want it to be done. They'll do it the way they think it should be done. And sometimes it can become a big problem for you when it comes down to having the right freelancer. So are you willing to spend time looking for the right person? This is just like interviewing someone for a job. You got to find the right freelancer in order to bring them aboard so that you can have them promote your podcast content diligently and very intelligently over the course of time. And the third thing that you have to ask yourself is, ask yourself the real reason why you actually do need a social media marketing manager for your podcast. Do you really need someone to promote your podcast, or can you just do it all on your own? So here's where I think you should be jumping into some of these questions and really analyzing and digging in deep to figure out what the ultimate purpose is for your podcast. Ask yourself, what are the specific goals you have for your podcast? Are the goals for your podcast to get more subscribers? Are the goals to get more email subscribers onto your email list? Maybe your goal is all about monetizing your podcast in some form. At the end of the day, we have to think about what exactly is your end game with your podcast. Now, when people jump into this podcasting game, I think they think, I'm just going to be able to crack a mic open and I'm just going to be able to talk whatever I want, talk about whatever I want, and then the listener is going to come and the money's going to come. That's not exactly how it works. It doesn't even work like that in radio when I'm here at the radio station working on the air. You have to build up attention. You have to build up interest within your program in order to start getting these things in place so that you can figure out exactly what your goal is. So if you don't have the answers to what the ultimate goal is for your podcast, then maybe you need to reevaluate your business income situation before you start hiring out for a social media manager, because that really isn't going to be beneficial for you down the line. Now, if you have the money, great, go ahead and start hiring someone out. Just make sure that you have a plan set in place so you can make the job a lot easier, more seamless for those people to promote your podcast. At the end of the day, when you hire someone out to do your social media, you want to get the best return on investment that you are putting into them so that they can promote your content so you can get more eyes back onto you. Now, let's use an example here of you hiring a social media manager, a really good one that's going to really get you some traction, and they are going to help you promote your podcast and really help you grow the podcast to where you're getting many, many listeners. Now, what will it cost to get one of these people to come in and do that work for you? Well, it depends. I've seen social media managers hire out anywhere between $700 to $1,000 a month just to do this. It's basically like a full-time job for them because they are really people who are really trained in strategy, and they're trained in getting traffic back to you. And that's why it's going to cost that amount of money. Now, if you're thinking, I'm just going to hire someone out, $25, $50 per week to do some work for me, yeah, you might get a couple posts out there, but it's not really going to make a dent. You have to really start thinking about the investment that it's going to take to get someone to start getting eyes on your content and traffic back to you and your website. Now, again, I don't want to discourage you from the idea of hiring out a social media manager because it really varies. I mean, sometimes you can find some really great social media managers that do a really great job for very little money, and you might be lucky if you get someone like that. But after working for a social media agency, doing social media here at the radio station, and helping my clients with social media, it does cost a lot of money in terms of how much money is being spent towards those social media managers and the results that you want to give to that podcast. And the fourth thing that you have to consider is, do you have a place for your listeners to go to capitalize on your social media manager's work or the ROI? Now, do you have a place for them to get on an email list? Do you have a place for them to join a membership area? Do you have a Patreon? Do you have those things in place before you hire a social media manager? Because likely your social media manager is going to ask you what your assets are. If you don't have these assets, then they're going to have to set them up for you, and that's just more money that you're going to have to spend with them so they can set them up for you. Another thing that you have to consider is, do you have products and services that you want to promote? And do you need to tell your social media manager about those products and services? Because maybe you're turning your podcast into something like a lead generating machine that will help you get business. Well, your social media manager needs to know that so they can figure out ways to drive traffic back to your website or to your podcast so that we can get you more business. So let me jump into what my steps are for doing it myself when it comes down to social media. Now, I have monetized my own website. I have monetized my YouTube channel. I have figured out the ways in which I can get people to come in on my channel and really build a connection with those people who are watching my YouTube videos, just like you. Maybe you have a connection with me. Maybe you don't. It doesn't matter, because I'm putting the pieces in place so I can make room for those who want my help. So here are my steps to doing it yourself marketing for your podcast. Now, first thing, before we jump into anything, I want to remind you again, like I said at the beginning of this video, that I have playlists on my YouTube channel on the front page that talk all about marketing and promotion for your podcast. There's some really great videos that talk about what I'm about to talk about right here, but I want to try to get a little deeper in this particular part of the video. So today we're going to focus specifically on the things you need to have in place for your podcast. So number one, email marketing programs or an email service provider. I'm not talking about Gmail. I'm not talking about MSN, if that's still around, or Yahoo Mail. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about email marketing service providers like MailChimp, Constant Contact, Aweber. There's a whole bunch of them out there that you can use. Kajabi's another one. That's the one that I happen to use. And is this email service provider connected directly to your website, which leads into number two. Do you have a website? I've talked about this so much on this channel that anytime a podcaster comes in and watches one of these videos, they say, oh, well, I don't have a website, and I just don't have the money to start a website. Well, I would say that if you're looking to invest in your podcast, you have to invest in the website, because that's where people get to learn more about you. Now, when we tie a website together with an email marketing provider or email service provider, the email service provider is meant to do things on automation. Doesn't mean that you're going to be doing everything on automation. It just means that it's going to help assist you by getting people in and collecting the data that will help you build relationships with those people off the podcast or off the YouTube channel or off Facebook. In some way, shape, or form, you need to have some type of email service provider that is connected directly to your website. Now, how do we get these people to stay invested with us? Well, you need to have on your website, you need to have a lead magnet. Now, you could go do a Google search on what a lead magnet is, and that will give you probably a better explanation of what a lead magnet is. But typically, a lead magnet is something that is of value, that gives a lot of great information to someone, that helps someone out, and they can take that information and they can run with it and get results later on down the line. What you're going to realize, depending on your podcast, is that your podcast is now turning into a business. Whether you are doing entertainment or whether you're doing some type of business podcast or educating someone, your podcast, regardless, at this point, if you want to hire out a social media manager, now becomes a business, because now you're trying to get results. And those results are either more podcast listeners or more email subscribers. So you want to be able to foster interaction with these people with an email service provider, with a lead magnet. All this stuff is connected with your website. So those are really the first two steps that you need to really have in place: an email service provider and a lead magnet with your website. Those are the most important things that you need to have before you even start your podcast, if you ask me. It doesn't mean that you can start your podcast and not have a website, of course, but you're going to have to build a website and get that up and running as soon as possible so that you can start capturing people immediately. Number three, you will want to get transcriptions for your podcast and put them on your blog. I've talked about this in videos that I've done in the past about a year ago, and they still are relevant to this day. Now, there's services out there that you can use with your hosting providers. Say, I don't know if Libsyn does it, but I think that Spreaker does, and maybe Simplecast does them. I can't remember. But there's a number of hosting providers that will create transcriptions of your podcast, and you get those transcriptions and you're going to put them on your blog's website or your website under the blog section, all right? And the reason why we do this is that the blog will serve as, I guess, content that Google can search when someone does a search for a particular keyword or a phrase, that when you have that content or those transcripts on your website, people can get directed to your website because you've put that content on your website. So the transcriptions of your podcast are going to be so valuable. Now, people ask me, they say, Shannon, it's such a long podcast episode. It's like an hour long and no one's going to read any of that stuff. That's completely fine. You're not putting it there for people to read. You're putting it there for search visibility inside of Google. So when people go to your website, they can see that, yeah, there's a blog there, but there's also a podcast player that is there. So people can go ahead and listen to your podcast. Number 4, you're going to use the text possibly in some of those transcriptions for content that you will be able to promote on your social media. So as an example, let's say you have a 10,000 word transcription of a podcast and someone had said something very, very poignant in the podcast, and you want to use that quote in some way to promote your podcast. Well, it could be so simple as just capturing the quote itself and then putting it into a scheduler like, say, TweetDeck, or even the one that I use is Agorapulse. And you can get that quote and put it into, say, Twitter, and then attach an image to it and maybe a link that goes back to that blog post where people can learn more about that podcast, and you share that out to Twitter. That's promoting your podcast. You're doing that over and over, okay? So that transcription that is 10,000 words, there's probably quite a few quotes that you could pull from there, and you could just keep recycling that information out, those quotes, so people can get an idea. You have to remember that people just aren't glued to social media. They are actually in and out of social media all day long. But if something can catch their eye and they can go to your website, then yes, you can start capturing more people to listen to your podcast. As long as you're using that strategy of having your podcast player on the blog post and you're having those transcriptions, you're helping yourself out in the long run. I want to reiterate this one more time. It's very important that you link back to the blog post where that podcast is so you can get traffic to the blog post so it can come up in search. Number 5, you should have an opt-in box on your blog sidebar widget somewhere. Now, you can get a lot of these little sidebar widgets. You can get pop-ups for your website. I know that podcasters say, I don't like pop-ups on my website, but I'll tell you what right now, pop-ups, they are probably the single most important thing on my website for people to opt in and grab my essential equipment guide list. Maybe it's a monetization guide, whatever it may be. That's a way they can get in on my website. So if you want a pop-up or you want an opt-in box, you have to leave an area in which someone wants to deepen the relationship with you, the podcaster. Otherwise, all you're doing is just sending them to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and they're only subscribing. There's no deeper part of the relationship. So put an emphasis on deepening the relationship with that listener through email marketing. Have those opt-in boxes on your blog sidebar. Make sure that you're giving something away for free. That's how you deepen those relationships. And number 6, the last step, just repeat the process. So that's going to be get transcripts of your podcast, put them on your blog post, grab quotes, promote them on Twitter or Facebook or wherever with a link that goes back directly to that blog post where the podcast is, and then just repeat the process over and over and over. That's all you're going to do. Now, your social media manager can probably do that using a program like Agorapulse, and that is probably the easiest way. Agorapulse is a great program that you can use. But for the most part, that's what you would do if you're doing it DIY, and I've done that certainly for my own YouTube channel. So I hope these tips have really helped you out. I know I went pretty deep in the weeds, and it's very rare for me to go deep in the weeds like this with a video of its nature, but I know that there are a lot of podcasters out there that are just looking to get a better idea on how to promote their podcast, and I'm doing my very best to share that information and my knowledge with you to help you get more eyes and ears onto your podcast. If you like this video, go ahead and leave it a thumbs up. And of course, make sure you hit the subscribe button if you're on YouTube and hit the bell notification so you can get notified when I drop a brand new video. And of course, leave a comment down in the section below and let me know, how are you promoting your podcast to get more ears to listen to your podcast? And what is the most difficult thing about promoting your podcast? And is there some way that I can help you out? Again, those comments are welcome in the comment section down below on YouTube or on my website as well. I look forward to hearing from you guys, and hopefully I can help you out. In the meantime, you guys have a great one. I'll talk to you soon.